First, what we see is that population growth in the cities is clearly outstripping that in the country. Over the last 10 years, the city population has grown at 17.5%. The country population has grown at about 14.3%. Some of the key differences then: the country population is marginally older. Demographically, it skews towards the older age group. So this line going down and then up is really interesting. There's an older skew and there's a slightly young skew, and there's this gap in the middle. What I think we're seeing is we're actually seeing people over the age of about 25 and under the age of about 50 having to leave the country or choosing to leave the country for school or for work or for raising families. Education levels much lower in the country than in the city. So throughout this presentation we'll see blue is country and red is the city. So whether you're male or female, if you're in the country, you're less likely to have some kind of degree by a substantial amount. The Australian population has become increasingly diverse. We've got more and more people living in Australia from other countries. When we look at non-capital city areas, it's not nearly so strong. So we have 84% of people living in country areas are Australian born. Pretty Australian born. When we turn to the cities, 63%, and 14 to 15% of the city population in Australia was born in Asia. And then we have people from Asian parents who were actually born in Australia, and lots of people from Europe, Ireland, New Zealand, other places. I mentioned a level of conservatism, and we do see more conservative attitudes. They're nuanced. This is not huge. It's not the country's hugely conservative and the city's hugely progressive. It's not like that at all. But on every measure, we see that there's a tendency for country people living outside the capital cities, to be more conservative. So consistently across the board, there's a slight degree of conservatism more in the country than the city. Now, in terms of telecommunications, a really important issue, obviously, in the country area, we see the country lags behind a little bit, but again, it's not absolutely huge. We see similar levels of owning or using a mobile phone, having the internet connected at home. This is not talking about speed. Speed is obviously an issue in many parts of the country, and we actually see fewer people in the country with broadband systems, for instance. We're seeing pretty similar levels of having a PC, but some of the other forms of technology, again, lower in the country. Less likely to have an iPod, or to be using VoIP, voice over internet protocol, or to have a 3G mobile phone. Less likely to be engaging in all of the activities that are associated with the internet and the web, and possibly related to speed of access, but possibly related to the levels of conservatism and even the age profile. So less likely to be using search, online community messaging, directories, doing their banking, or news and newspapers online. A general theme, a little bit less likely to be engaging in all of this kind of technology. And the frequency of internet use, again, higher in the city. The use of major media types, not huge differences, but again, it looks to me like there's a movement away from major forms of media. TV is still really strong, but there's a movement away from major forms of media, which is just lagging a little bit in the country areas. Now let's get to the kind of hard numbers, the hard pieces. We're seeing unemployment has been higher in the country for a long time. It hasn't just kind of hit. This is not a new phenomenon. Unemployment has been higher in the country for the last 13 years, and we see currently the Roy Morgan unemployment figure for the country is 10.7, whereas in the city it's 8.6. And the problem of unemployment has always been higher among young age groups. Wherever you are, if you're in that young age group and unemployment goes up, you're going to have problems. You're unskilled, you don't have experience, it's just really hard to get into the workforce. We also see the occupation, the profile, the kinds of work that people are doing is substantially different in the country and the city. I think the numbers, though, are quite astounding. To have things like professional and managers at around 36% in the city, and running at that 6 and 18, 24% in the country areas is really quite substantial. And you see, relating to education levels and access to the kind of work that's available, skilled workers and semi-skilled workers much higher in country areas. And as a result of all of those things we've just talked about, the socio-economic status of folk living outside the capital cities is much lower. What we see in that top quintile, 24% of people in the country are in the top quintile, 14% of people in the country. Big gap. And at the bottom end, that bottom quintile, you're seeing the opposite. So all of those things coming together, unemployment, the kind of job levels that people are engaged in and the education levels roll up together to create this quite disparate view in terms of socio-economic status. So we have consumer confidence levels much lower. In the country, 107.4. In the city, 115.4. Confidence is really important. If people are confident, they do things, they buy things, they engage with things. If businesses are confident, they employ people, they invest. Confidence is absolutely crucial. It's something that drives things. It doesn't just happen. The major reason for confidence being lower in the country is that not very many people, only 25% of people in the country, expect good times in the next 12 months. The financial data, the financial position of people in capital cities versus country areas shows clearly that those in the city have higher net wealth levels. So that the net wealth in the country areas $249,000 versus city $300,000. The household income is higher in the city than in the country. The home loan, pretty similar. People tend to have home loans, about 30% in both areas having a home loan. And similar numbers have what could be called a situation of mortgage risk. So about 19% in the country and about 18% in the city have what we call, are in a situation of mortgage risk. And mortgage risk is essentially where you have about 30% or more of your income is dedicated to paying off your mortgage. Now, I'd like now to talk about health issues in the country. When I've been talking to people on the radio, they're very interested in this. And I think it's because we all, most of us here, live in the city or spend time in the city. We do have a somewhat romanticised view of the country, you know, the fresh air and all of those beaut things, a wonderful, healthy lifestyle, if only we weren't living in the smoggy city and in the country. Well, the data dispels that myth really strongly. What we see clearly, incidence of smoking is higher in the country than the city. Remember, smoking's trending down, the country is still smoking. They're drinking, more likely to be drinking, and when they drink more in the country. Now let's get serious. They're less likely to participate in sporting activities or any kind of physical exercise. Now, many would say, well, they're working doing physical labour, they don't need to. They're not all working in physical labour and don't need to. This is an issue. The whole movement towards health, well-being, exercise has not reached the same proportion in the country areas as it has in capital cities. Their attitudes towards health are not nearly as clear and solid. All of the health fads that we seem to engage in the city, and most of them have some value, we engage in them more in the city than the country. These health issues are not catching on so much in the country. As a result of all of these things, or perhaps it's just coincidence, they're much more likely to be overweight or obese in the country versus the city. And when it comes to the real hard question, what health problems and illnesses do you have, the country outstrips the city on almost every health problem. Some of it may be that skew towards older population. You know, we all know as we get older we're more likely to get something go wrong with us. There's a little bit of that clearly. But I think what we're also seeing is a big issue of a lack of health, a lack of concern about those things. Also relating to health problems is health access. So in terms of our question, what's the biggest issue facing the world or facing Australia, more to the point Australia, we see people in the country are more likely to mention health services, hospitals. So health access to those things is clearly an issue. It is an issue, it's not just a perception. And many of these health problems would have probably exacerbated by not being dealt with early. So, you know, going to see specialists or even getting medical care for things is probably less likely to be happening in the country than it is in the city. We're also seeing a greater level of distrust and antagonism towards the government. So people in the country are more likely to say they don't trust the current Australian government. That comes through in the business sector as well. they're less likely to think the government's doing a good job running the country, and they're less likely to believe that the economy is on the improve.